Okay. Hi, everybody. So we were going to wait for Pierre, but Pierre has not arrived. So let's just get started. So all this afternoon, I don't know about you, but as a citizen of the United States, I'm having a major freak out. But I've had some major freakouts before in the United States, although different. And I wanted to tell you about one. And that was during the Seattle ministerial, when lots of people took to the streets, and President Bill Clinton, he wanted to add labor and environment provisions in the World Trade Organization, the agreements that underpin that. And many people thought that would be a good idea because governance could meet the challenges of the times. And unfortunately, I don't think governance is meeting the challenge of the times today, nor is it really addressing the problems that we have in terms of the power of data-driven technologies to manipulate us, but to also to improve our lives. So I would like you to sit on that for a while and see what you think about that. So today we have 4 presentations, including me. I'm in the weird position of presenting and being a chair, but I think we are living in topsy-turvy times, and I just wanted to give you a few things to think about related to AI. So if you were here for the previous panel, it was odd to me that we were talking about governance frameworks, but not really talking about the real problem that needed to be governed, which was the business practices of the firms that collect data and create AI. And I find that kind of bizarre, just as I did in Seattle, where the solution in Seattle became, let's all do corporate social responsibility and let's have voluntary initiatives. And it seems today what we're doing is focusing on participatory mechanisms, which is great. I was pleased to work with all the people that planned this, but we didn't really talk about governance mechanisms that are mandatory or incentives to really change firm behavior. And as you know, because you're older than 10, unless you incentivize certain types of behavior, you're unlikely to get the behavioral changes that you want. So let's see if we can get some new insights from this panel. And so we are going to begin with Soizic, who is an independent scholar, and she is going to talk about France. We also are going to have presentations about Brazil, France, Australia, and the United States. So we're going to have an interesting mix of countries. So Soizic, want to start?
And this. Oh. Perfect. Hi, everyone. Thank you for still being here after a whole day of fascinating but also very dense presentations. So I'm going to try to be as lively as I can while being a little bit tired myself. So my name is Soizic Pénicaud, and I'm here mostly as a practitioner and an activist trying to reflect on some of the things that I've participated in. And I'm going to talk to you today about the mobilizations that happened and are still happening against the use by the French National Welfare Agency, CNAF, of a risk scoring fraud detection algorithm. Brief background on this system. Since 2011, the French National Welfare Agency has been using an algorithm to give each of the 13 million recipient households of the CNAF a score that corresponds to the risk of their file containing mistakes. And this score is used to prioritize which households are going to be controlled through very invasive methods. I've written a paper about this that is linked on the PAIR's website. The system is described a little bit longer in there. I don't have much time today as we know, but I just want to take a second and acknowledge this quote from Juliette, who's a 50-year-old single mother who was controlled by CNAF and asked to repay 2,800 euros after she received money from her family to help her visit her dad who was dying from cancer. So this was a mistake on her end, and she was still asked to repay. And I think the reason I wanted to do this is because I want to ground my presentation in the fact that the system I'll discuss, and AI in general, has real critical impacts on millions of real people, and that if we talk about participation, we really need to think about the people that we're trying to involve and center. So, long story short, between 2021 and 2023, media and civil society organizations in France decided to mobilize against this algorithm to either make it visible or to also reveal its discriminatory character, but also to get it banned. And so, as I said, I was involved in a practitioner in this, as a practitioner in this, and so this is an attempt for me to present this to you and reflect about what we did, what worked, what didn't work, what we could have done better. And to give you a very brief rundown of what was happening, we had two movements that decided to work on this at the same time, but from separate places. And we had on the one side civil society, so access to welfare organizations, but also digital rights organizations. This is Changer de Cap, Le Mouton Numérique, and La Quadrature du Net. And on the other side, we had media, so Lighthouse Reports, which is an investigative journalism collective in Europe who was investigating different welfare systems across the continent, and then Les Décodeurs, who is Le Monde's data journalism team. And they both partnered to investigate the system. Again, I have lots of thoughts about why these two movements happened at the same time, how they collaborated. This is in the paper. We can address it in questions over coffee, etc. But what I want to focus on right now is two of the strategies that were used to raise public awareness and try to get media attention and political attention about the system. So I'm going to look at two of them. The first one is contesting via the human impact. So in the fall of 2021, Changer de Cap, which is an access to welfare collective, was alerted that a lot of beneficiaries were encountering issues with the welfare system. Technical issues, or issues related to tech, issues not related to tech. And so as a result, they put out a call for testimonials to try and understand and classify the issues better. And they ended up receiving over 100 testimonials. And then the coordination of this access to welfare organization pseudonymized the testimonials, fact-checked them, and categorized them into what they called an advocacy support file. So all issues, not only AI. And then in addition to understanding the issues better, this file was helpful for them to try and get the media's attention. So they turned it into a press release, they turned it into events to try to get the word out. And this campaign was actually quite effective. In early 2022, it helped get, and then late 2023, helped get the algorithm onto the media map. Interestingly, mainly through the lens of this risk scoring algorithm. And it also led to CNAF, the welfare agency, opening up an informal, kind of limited, but at least somewhat open line of dialogue with these organizations. So great, good strategy, interesting. One thing that I wanted to raise, though, is that actually none of these testimonials talked about the risk scoring algorithm, because recipients don't know that they're being scored. The reason Changer de Cap knew about it is from other research that they discovered through desk research and interviews with sociologists and digital rights experts. And then basically building a somewhat, I would say, artificial, not necessarily in a bad sense, but a bridge between the testimonials and the risk scoring algorithm. So of course, they used this algorithm from a strategic point of view because it was very smart to get media attention, but it didn't come up in the testimonials, which really help us think about first the role of these stories, which helped collectivize distress, but not necessarily pinpoint the issues. And so, yes, limitations of this strategy. And then there's also a question of, through this strategy, and I want to get to this, but I don't have time, so I'm just going to ask the question and then move on. The question that it raises also is, are we really centering voices and creating community through just gathering testimonials? Because in this particular story, this particular strategy, the testimonials were used mostly by the Changer de Cap organization to then themselves talk about the issues, not necessarily letting people who had shared their stories tell them to the public. So we can get more into detail, but this is really the question of, let's look with more nuance at the strategies that we're using. The second strategy that was used both by Les Décodeurs and Lighthouse Reports, so our media, and La Quadrature du Net, a digital rights organization, was to obtain the parameters of the algorithm via FOIA requests, so freedom of information, to show how the criteria mechanically led to vulnerable people being scored higher than others. And there was a dual logic to this. The first one was for tech-savvy people to use their data science knowledge to demonstrate that the algorithm was not neutral, but political, and to gain legitimacy through addressing the problem via technology. And for journalists, the idea was also to shine a new light on a previously covered topic in kind of a shiny data journalism way, so to do something that hadn't been done before. And, you know, this actually worked. When I say we, it's Le Monde and Lighthouse Reports got published on the front page of Le Monde. We got a lot more coverage than we did via gathering testimonials, actually. And in-depth inquiries by the French rights defender and the Data Protection Authority were triggered via this new media campaign in late 2023. And the question I want to reckon with today about this strategy is, why aren't the voices of affected people as legitimate as this system of using AI? What I mean by that is the analysis of the parameters really led to the same conclusions that had already come up from the testimonials, which was vulnerable people are disproportionately affected. And yet, the entry point via technology was much more effective at grabbing the general public and politicians' attention. This is, I know, a naive question, but something that I am just, as a human being, really struggling with in this current day and age. And I'll end with open questions that I'm sitting with and would love help to answer. The first one is related to this technology strategy that I just mentioned, is this trap of the algorithmic framing. Because framing this issue of welfare through AI was really helpful to shine a new light on it, but we're actually not contesting the algorithm. We're contesting a welfare policy. We're contesting controlling vulnerable people, controlling the poorest. So while the algorithm helps us renew issues of welfare by looking at it through the tech, the risk is a later overfocus on this risk scoring algorithm that prevents us from thinking about the actual policies at stake. And the other risk is institutional responses being, we'll just build a better algorithm, which is kind of actually what CNAF did. So there is academic literature about these risks, but in practice for activists, and at least for us here in this local context, this remains an open question. And the last question I have for us all is, what do we call grassroots? And, you know, today we've heard a lot about participation, local contexts, community organizing. But speaking as someone who comes from the digital rights community, we tend to look at single issue organizations like welfare organization, housing organization, labor unions as grassroots or community orgs just because they're not focused on technology. And as I showed with this idea of testimonials being mediated, being reappropriated by an organization that wasn't itself a community organization, we can see that that's actually not systematically the case. And so this is just a quick call for us to add carefulness and nuance to our analysis. I'm out of time, so I'll just mention that actually there is legal complaint happening right now about this welfare system that I'm looking forward to following and hopefully report back to this crowd at a later date. Thank you very much.
And thank you for being gracious about my mispronunciation.
Oh, no, I think you did great.
Okay. All right. So next is Estelle, Hary.
Hello, everyone. Um, so just a brief introduction. I'm a PhD candidate at RMIT University, and I'm actually a designer and researcher. I'm particularly interested in what I call the thickness of making, which in practice translate in practicing and deploying participatory design methods in relation to AI systems. So today I'll tell you a story about the slow, what I call, the slow decay of such practice in the context of French government innovation ecosystem. And all you'll see today comes from a field of investigation I've done from summer 2023 to summer 2024. So a brief explanation of the context. So a year and a half ago, the French government announced that it was building its own sovereign generative AI system. Don't ask me why it was such an important thing. But what happened is that there were one administration, one gov department that was responsible for developing this, which is the DNUM. And the place where this, so Albert was deployed was France Service. So France Service is a network of places where you can go as a citizen to get help on administrative procedures. And you get help from what's called France Service advisors, which are public servants that are specialized in like simple, if I can say, administrative procedures. So as a researcher, I was, and I'm using these action research methods, I worked with the DNUM, with the development team in the making of Albert itself. And so when I discussed at the beginning with the DNUM, what I had in mind in terms of participation and what we should be doing was really about having an exploratory and open-ended, participative, I would say, questioning of what it meant to have this kind of generative AI technology introduced in this very specific context of the France Service. So my point was really to question and to explore the conditions for meaningful and relevant deployment of such technology in this context. I was clearly influenced by work that has been done years ago in the 80s by a researcher in Scandinavia. So this is the Utopia project you have on the screen, which is really the seminal work when it comes to participatory design methods and practices, where basically you had a group of researchers who worked with graphic worker labor union to design and co-design graphic software in the face of computers coming in the workplace and displacing the work of graphic workers. Why I'm speaking of this example in particular is that I really saw similarities with the situation graphic workers were facing when computers arrived on the workplace, and AI and generative AI in the context of the front service advisors, and how it could potentially change their work practices. So the thing is, quite quickly in the project, there were structural constraints that kind of killed, if I can say, this idea of an exploratory and open-ended participatory approach. And those constraints, there are of two kinds. The first one, well, maybe it's obvious to say it, but it was a political mandate. Basically, when you have the Prime Minister and the Minister for Public Transformation that are asking for this generative AI to be deployed, it's quite hard to go against it or even ask the question, is it really needed to do it in the first place? And what was also very interesting is that there was a very specific way this technology should be deployed, there was really this notion of this, or this idea of having a chatbot. And I will come back to this a bit later. What's also interesting is that a specific department was created in DNUM to create this Albert system. And so for this department, it was quite hard as well to say, okay, we won't deploy it because, well, they need to prove they have value for the administration. The second very important constraint is that DNUM has what they call a state startup mindset when it comes to project management. In practice, that translates into when you do a project, you have to do this kind of iterative and rapid prototyping, and it's very outcome driven. So it means that in 4 to 6 months, you have to deliver a product that can be used by people. This time frame is not really compatible with those kind of exploratory participatory methods, and so it really kind of shut down the whole idea. Another point in terms of project culture, the DNUM has a very, I mean, they already have participatory methods used, especially because we have a lot of designers in the state, and more designers actually, who have participatory methods coming from UX design, user research, and that kind of practices. And basically, when you say participation, there is already an anchor on what participation means and what it should be. So with those constraints, the exploratory approach kind of transformed into what I call the checkbox kind of participation, where basically the kind of methods to be used were quite very narrowly defined, if I can say. But still, you need to be, resourceful, if I can say. And actually, those methods, if I name a few, it could be, for example, immersion, surveys, interviews, critical reviews of design artifacts, that kind of things. Those are things I master as a designer, and I can play with to try to, and I'm using a notion from Dan Hill, try to, I would say, bring Trojan horse in the design artifacts and trying to bring hidden strategic elements into the design so that we can shift a bit the trajectory of the AI system that is developed. Still, the problem is, again, it didn't work. And if you want, we could go a bit more in detail on this afterward. It didn't work. We had some success at the beginning, like trying to shift a bit the kind of use scenario of this AI system and that kind of things. But quite quickly, I was confronted with the imaginaries and beliefs of the other team member developing the technology to this alternative. And when I say imaginaries, I think it's quite important to have in mind that when most of the, well, no, not most, but in my specific context, the dominant AI narratives really shaped what was thinkable in terms of how could we interact with this technology. So most of the time, ChatGPT or Perplexity AI were, showed as a successful product that should be copied without trying to think about how do you, adapt it to a very specific context that has very specific work practices. And also another point that was really interesting is that the belief that the development team had that AI is superior, if I can say, to humans, more objective, faster, etc. It really went against France Advisor's local knowledge. And so basically, it was believed that whereas we know there are issues of hallucinations and that kind of things with generative AI, it was really considered that the answers proposed by Albert were better somehow than the one the France service advisors were giving in any case. I'll go a bit quicker now. So the conclusion of this is that with these new constraints, we ended up on what we could call AI participatory forms and methods, which basically is giving feedback on the results and the quality of the answers generated by Albert. So basically that could also be called work and click work. And this is something that the front service advisors have to do to improve the system. So my conclusion very quickly, because I'm running out of time, I know, sorry. So in this very specific case, I think here participation is very performative. It's a way for the public administration to say, look, we are doing this participation thing, so we are doing a proper and ethical AI system. And also participation doesn't really equate with power redistribution. And I think we should always ask who says I'm doing participation and who is making it as well. And I will go to another slide, and I forgot to change my slide all the time. I'm sorry for this. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being here on a Saturday afternoon. My name is Jess. I'm a policymaker by training, and I teach at the University of Virginia. And my co-author, Pedro Augusto, who is online, is an anthropologist who also teaches at the University of Virginia in different schools. And this work is some kind of response to the need that we feel, especially in North America, to look beyond the US borders, and I would include Canada in there as well, because Brazil has been leadership in digital policies and technology policies for over 2 decades. And we want to think about technology policy more broadly and see what can be learned in terms of like best practice, but also mistakes to avoid by looking at very specific cases in the recent years that Brazil tried to legislate or regulate technology. And this comes in the context of a re-democratization. If you don't know, Brazil faced 21 years of dictatorship. Oops. Yes, thank you. And in this process of the re-democratization, we got a federal constitution that is very clear about the role of social justice and social participation. Article 193, it says like the state creates the policies, but like people are responsible and they to like give their opinion and participate and get involved and engage. And that is getting cheered by law in the country. And so from the 90s, that became more and more common to the point that some regulatory agencies, when they were created, they required some kind of public consultation, social participation process in their policy and lawmaking. And then participation for the first time in many years became this kind of like an opportunity and a possibility, but also can be seen as a burden, and that's the narrative from like more the corporate actors in this process, because the argument is that participation delays the process or like hinders innovation. And also when you require participation by law, it can become quite performative in terms of procedures. Like this, the one on the top is our platform, like current platform, federal level public consultation. You can see like 4 different steps. So you need to have access to a computer, to internet, and then like register, create an account, and be able to like input your information on the like currently open, whatever kind of decisions the federal government needs to make that are up for like social participation, we can call. And all these years doing field work in technology policy in Brazil, we saw like so many terrible examples of how like not to do public consultation. Like this one is from Campinas, a city with over 1 million people that created this new smart city plan, lots of AI in it. And the so-called public consultation was basically send us an email, and here's the email, like in the bottom of the website, and that's like one response to the like requirement to do. And the case say, we did it. Yes, it's here. See. And so I have two case studies that I'll briefly talk to you about today. The first one is the Civil Rights Framework for the Internet. That kind of, it's a landmark regulatory framework, quite unique to Brazil, and paved the way to our General Data Protection Regulation, and more recently, the AI regulation process that we still don't have it, or like in the process of discussing it. And it was considered quite like a successful process of social participation that involved different stakeholders, because it was a collaboration between the federal government, FGV, a private university, and the Brazilian Internet Steering Committee as well. And this collaboration commenced like right in the beginning of the consultation process in 2009. And when the consultation actually began in 2010, like people were already engaged in different interests aligned in trying to build that together. It took time. And there was this emphasis that now we see everywhere, but at the time, like the multi-stakeholder groundwork was done, and that allowed all of us to get more support from all interested parties. And at the time, we used an online platform developed by the Minister of Justice and FGV that I think 15 years ago, this was like quite creative, that people could go and see each other's comments and add their comments, and also like submit long form contributions that are more formal. But at the same time, government and civil society organizations made a huge effort to go to people. And so we had like a year almost of public consultation, with people going to events and conferences and seminars and talking to people and bringing digital rights advocates into the conversation, and all sorts of kind of like more informal contributions, from hashtag on former Twitter to kind of like conversations they had at those events as well. All this helped to shape what a public consultation would be, with thousands and thousands and thousands of contributions. And it was a task force to make that happen. And was deemed truly accessible to all interested parties. And we did have a consensus on the necessity of having this kind of legal framework. And the legitimacy of the process was probably because like there was this constant, continuous public support. And when it went to the legislative branch, it was like easier commitments and compromises were made. But it was kind of like an interesting process that we didn't see it being quite successful in the copyright law reform that we have. About the same time, started a little bit earlier, and it didn't start like from the regulatory perspective, but more like the Minister of Culture, with a very famous singer at the time who was our minister, and like Creative Commons and free culture and all those things, there were principles embedded into the Minister of Culture. And so trying to think about access to information and access to culture, access to knowledge from this federal level kind of perspective. At first, they were just trying to understand the creative industry of the country. And then this kind of engagement continued of like going to different regions of the country. It's a massive country, like inviting people and listening to people, going where people are, like in bringing civil society organizations in that process as well. And then we managed to get a draft view of what would be our new law. And you can see that the current law is from 1998. And at the time, like things were moving slowly, but then like the government changed, minister changed, and the process was completely demobilized, and it was put in a drawer properly, and we never really got just like a full copyright reform. We saw like smaller reforms, changing a few specific things, most led by industry in this case. So it shows like that sometimes like all this mobilization and building this kind of relationship with government, with civil society organization, industry, academia, although very important, it can be really frail. And to conclude, like what are like some comments and hopefully like provocations, questions as well that we have, like thinking about the work that we did at the time and the work that we are doing now with like mostly AI policy and advocacy in this case. And even though like we have this kind of requirement for public consultation, social participation, we do have what we would call well-established participation mechanisms, multi-stakeholder engagement, but not necessarily meaningful. But this kind of like legitimacy and working with government in those cases was very, very important. And it takes a lot of compromise and time. As you saw, the law took like 4 years to take shape and be like approved in 2014. And like the so-called good governance that I heard like colleagues speaking about it earlier today, it includes a lot of proactive collaboration. Those things, they just don't happen over time. And sometimes I feel like there's a lot to learn here. Civil society from North America to all the coalitions and mobilization and collaboration that we have regionally in Latin America, but specifically in South America as well. And this kind of openness, keeping an open channel with the government is very, very important. We see like whenever more authoritarian far-right governments rise in the country, then we lost much of those channels. And capacity building is very important in that process as well, like bringing people from the government into the spaces where digital rights activists are working, or researchers are working on those topics, and kind of like bringing people from industry in this case as well to try to like find some common ground. So going where they are, and also like this kind of data collection that's more like citizen-generated data and informal, unstructured, non-specialist, like all this needs to make their way into the participation process. But not necessarily like in an email that you send and say like, here's my participation. And we also saw the cooptation of civil society by industry and government over the years, especially after this demobilization over the last like 10 years. And so many of like the advocates, like digital rights advocates, move it to industry or move it to government as well. Civil society organizations, as we know, are underfunded, overworked. And so there's this capacity imbalance of like industry having their like lobbyists able to go to Brasilia to advocate for the interests of the company they represent, but not necessarily civil society organization have like the same kind of access. And we are seeing all this reproduced with AI regulation right now. So I'd like to leave like all these thoughts about technology policy so we can think about social participation in AI from South American perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so mine kind of fits really well after yours. So mine is really 3 papers put together. It's not the title that I had already said because it's what I've learned from doing this 3 times now. So basically what I've tried to do is talk about why a dialogue about AI governance is important, and what does research tell us. So first of all, what does research tell us? AI systems are often designed and deployed in an opaque manner. We already talked about the opacity of data. The process is also opaque in many cases. But as we know, if you study democracy, you learn that interaction with citizens can build trust in AI systems and governance, and deliberative democracy may also improve AI governance and its effect on human welfare. And that's what we all want, right? If we're going to use AI, if AI really is a public good, we want it to enhance human welfare and not just, show us pretty Instagram pictures. Okay, so the problem is, how do you get people to care, right? It's an uphill battle. Citizens may struggle to understand the issues, and they may not want to get involved. Citizens and policymakers may not want to hear from citizens. Frankly, that's what I found in many cases. But citizens can see things that policymakers may not do. Dialogue may increase accountability, and that may enhance trust. That's the relationship, that feedback loop that we seem to be losing in the United States. Okay, so I did 2 studies. The first study was published in 2023 and was called Missing Persons. And so I looked at whether in, I think it was 43 countries, did policymakers consult with their citizens about AI, how they were going to govern AI and their strategies for AI. And then the other paper, which I've been waiting to be published, it's done, it's long been done, looks at the recent call by the National Telecommunications and Information Agency, which is part of the US Department of Commerce. And President Biden asked that agency to see if open source systems created more risk, and if those risks were manageable, then closed systems. And so, okay, for all of these papers, I did the same thing, which is we did a landscape analysis. Everyone knows what that is. So it's kind of plotting various groups and what they said. And we struggled, as I think all of us have struggled, defining who is the public. Right? Are they stakeholders? Are they citizens? Are they non-citizens? Do you have to have a representative sample? Because I can tell you that when people respond to public comment, it is nowhere near a representative sample. And then, is the dialogue effective? So these were my research questions in every paper, the same questions. Who responded to the call? What materials did the government provide to prepare or enable the public to give informed advice, right? We're talking about complex systems here. So it's, not so easy for people who may have a high school degree or people who don't have a high school degree, but have people who do have a high school degree and may have a PhD in engineering, they may struggle to understand that system too. Okay, so did governments do anything to prepare their citizens? Then did the government market the call? And you wouldn't think this is that important, but it is, because most people don't read national government's registry of these kind of calls. Next, the feedback loop. So did the government actually listen to what these respondents said? And how did it engage with them? Did it do it online? Did it do it at many public hearings, et cetera? And then where it fit on this. And so this is the International Association of Political Participation's metric. So I wanted to describe this consultation and whether or not it achieved the feedback loop. I wanted to use a widely accepted metric of governance. And this one goes from informing the public to consulting the public to involving them, right, in the design of the questions, et cetera, to truly collaborating and then empowering people. Okay, so what did I find? So using the NTIA one, NTIA asked 52 questions. That's way too much. But, open versus closed AI system is complicated. They gave no background material, really. They just had an overview of their questions. So I'm going to call it little as a courtesy. And they did very little to market the call to average people. Okay, so who commented? There were 370, of which, some of them were not really people. I think they're called bots. And then groups. 52% were individuals, of which 30% were anonymous. Now, one has to ask, why would people not want to put their names on their beliefs? Okay, did NTIA prepare these people with sufficient information? Well, I'd say no. I think it was also hard to follow. Did they make an effort to ensure a broad cross-section of Americans commented? For that one, barely. I'll call that no. Did they provide any evidence that the US government made use of these comments? No. Okay, now this may change soon, because it seems to me that with DeepSeek, open versus closed systems have become a national security issue in many countries. So we'll see what happens next. But if I were to apply that spectrum going back here, remember this? It gets this far to consult, which is nothing. That's not very democratic, right? So when we're talking about participatory, we are nowhere near where we need to be. And again, I'm just giving you details on one study. There's lack of time here, but the implications, the United States government doesn't really give a shit about what its people think about AI. The US government under Joe Biden tried to model how you govern AI, and it's hardly a model. And then I think one thing, we've danced around this in the sessions that I've attended, but we really need a new approach to governance, right? That is really participatory and really creates that feedback loop. And we are nowhere near where we should be on that. So I would say, from what I've heard here, right, on every level, it seems to me, not just with my own paper, design, development, deployment, and governance of AI, we are not achieving participatory governance. And that's really problematic. And then just to give you an overview, like we recently, so I'm co-PI of an NSF institute, and we looked at these, how does the world engage people on AI? And there's all sorts of modes like crowdsourcing, right? Everyone knows what that is. You just send out a call for public comment, and you hopefully people comment online. So it's really not that much different from the Federal Register type call. Then constitutional AI, which is Anthropic's approach, which is that you have to design the AI in a democratic manner and make sure the AI has a constitution. Then there's AI assemblies. The EU does this a lot, as does Canada, where they pay people, they educate them, and then they ask them to respond to questions over a weekend. And they do get a representative sample that way. This slide talks about, I don't want to take more time, but the problems and the benefits of these approaches. Citizen science approaches. Are you all familiar with citizen science, where you have individuals do the work and they report on it? And I think that is very empowering, although it is not representative. So none of these methods are fabulous, but this conference is about participatory governance to achieve trust. And I would say we are nowhere near achieving trustworthiness, let alone trust. So we need to think differently. And I'm very worried. I mean, I'm worried, period, about the United States, but I'm really concerned that national security has become the rubric for creating AI instead of AI being a public good. And let's be honest, it is a public good. It is a dual use technology, right? It's good for economic progress and national security. And it is general purpose technology. And we have to find ways to make it trusted, or it will never achieve its potential. So thanks for hearing me out. So why don't we go to some questions? Does anyone have some questions? We don't have a person to roam around, but maybe Pierre will do it. Thank you, Pierre. You wanted to make some comments. Did you want to wait or, okay. Does anyone have any questions? Gentleman over here, hi.
Thank you all for the wonderful talks. Still very interesting despite jet lag and being tired and lack of caffeine. My question's for Jess. Thanks for introducing sort of especially the sort of the resource imbalances and who might be able to participate in like government governance, municipal governance, et cetera. I know most, but still not much about participation in sort of public comment in the case of environmental review. And I really liked, I mean, I guess my question is about the idea that can introduce friction, and sometimes that's good. Like either the friction itself is generative because you learn things, or it's like I'm happy if there's friction in the way of building a pipeline, for example. I'm less happy if there's friction in the way of building public housing or something that like NIMBYs will often rally against. And again, back to the resources point that you brought up, I'm wondering if you can offer some thoughts on productive versus less productive friction in participatory government processes, how you might whether they can be distinguished or whether it's simply a matter of different interests, for example, or any thoughts you have in that sort of area.
Hi. Thanks so much. This is a really good question. Let me see if I have answers for you. One example, friction, thinking about the current AI draft bill that we have. At first, Senate invited lawyers only to think about like a regulatory framework for AI for the entire country. And civil society, of course, and like scholars as well. Everyone was really like the backlash was huge, as you can imagine. And beyond the fact that we're just lawyers regulating something so technical and so like difficult to comprehend on a general level, most, if not all of them, were white in a country whose majority of the population is not white. So all these kind of like historical inequalities emerged again when we were looking at AI. And I think like the friction was enough for the Senate to like take a few steps back and rethink the process and invite people like from different disciplines and actually like take into account gender, race, ethnicity, and other like voices being represented in that like first kind of like round of consultations, like hearing specialists, then moving to like listening allegedly to people. So I think sometimes like all these years working in digital rights in Latin America, we learned that sometimes you need to be really annoying and you need to be very persistent. And sometimes you only get like the bare minimum of what you're asking if you like make a lot of noise. And that like works well, depending on the government. And I think like we're still recovering from the 4 years we had under Bolsonaro, like so many of these policies were like changed. And I always think that both civil society and also academia in Brazil, they do a lot with such like little resources, so underfunded and overworked, as I said. And sometimes it's just like by this kind of coalition mobilization that we have at the regional level that helps as well build like these bridges and work together to like put your resources together from like your mental health and energy, but also like funding for advocacy, for example. Thank you.
Renee?
This is for Swazi. When we talk about AI, we're often arguing about the difference between instrumentalist ethics and Kantian or deontological ethics, or red lines of human rights. It is useful to talk also about what's called retributivist ethics, which is an ethics of retribution, which you see in criminology, in which systems are used to punish people. And so many of the AI systems, especially at subnational levels of government, are used when they detect fraud, when they surveil people, is AI as retribution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a trend that we see and a question that we need to ask about what is AI used, what is automation used for in government. Virginia Eubanks talks about it very well, other scholars as well. One thing that I want to keep underlining, though, is that, for instance, in the case of France, the algorithm was not the only thing that was retributive, right? It was it's a push towards a narrative of welfare queens. I'm putting quote unquote, I'm sorry to use this word, but it's really this dominant discourse, these dominant representations of undeserving poor people who should be controlled. That seeps into different types of policies, and these policies can be technical and can also not be technical. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we have to sometimes question the framing of AI governance, because here we're not governing AI, we're governing policy. And so it's a useful lens to look at it because AI has a lot of traction. AI has a lot of, it's hypey, it's sexy to talk about AI governance. But really here, the question that I'm currently sitting with is, can we actually do AI governance that works if the system that we're working inside of is just has too many power imbalances? And I'm a little bit disillusioned about AI governance right now, and so I think I didn't know anything about these ethics lenses that you discussed, so I'd be really happy to learn more about them. And I think they're really helpful framings. And then the question is, how do we use this AI lens to think about policy more broadly and not lose our focus? Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. We have an online question.
Indeed, we have Joe in the chat asking, who do you find harder to budge, policymakers or the public? Policymakers to listen to the public or the public to participate at all? I don't know who'd like to answer.
What is more difficult, getting policymakers to listen or the public to participate?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't want to hug the microphone. I just want to say something that I think is interesting in the field that I'm in, which I'm in many different things, but AI and welfare. A lot of the time we hear that people don't care about AI, or that people don't know about the harms or benefits of AI, or like people don't have an opinion and people don't want to tell you. But actually, people have opinions and people are very aware of the impacts of these technologies on their lives. And if you just listen and open up lines of communication that are adapted to the way that they just want to tell you, they will tell you. So it's not, I think I understand that in some contexts, you need to mobilize the public, which the question is, who is the public? But when you take it from a sectoral approach, it's actually very easy to mobilize people because it has a direct impact on their lives. And what's difficult is to get policymakers to listen to people who have something to say. And so I think that sometimes it is a bit of a red herring to ask, what do we need to do to mobilize the public? Maybe you're just not listening to the people who already have something to say.
Jess, did you want to comment?
We can come close.
No, actually, you should say something.
Well, actually, you said everything, Soizic. So no, basically, I think there is a problem of listening from decision makers. And what I've observed on Albert is that even though the advisors could have different ideas and that kind of things, it wasn't really listened to because, you know, the technological path was already set. And so moving from it wasn't really thinkable somehow. So yeah, I think, Soizic, you're totally right.
One more question from the audience, two more. So let's try to keep the answers short because the session will end at 4:45. Yes. So go ahead. And I saw you back there. Perhaps we're going to bundle the questions together so we are sure that you get to address them.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the very insightful panel. My question maybe for Susan. I agree in that we need new governance frameworks, more flexible ones. And there was a nice light on alternative mechanisms, crowdsourcing, citizen science, citizen juries. They all fail somehow to meet what Fiskin called the democratic reform trilemma, that you cannot meet simultaneously participation, equality, at the same, and it was participation, equality, and representation at the same time. So somehow, to mitigate the trilemma, I wonder whether we need a modular approach because they all have interesting points, and because again, one side does not fit all, and some people can devote a lot of time to participatory processes. Some other people can only fill a survey, and that's fine. And some people have more expertise in a specific topic as opposed to another. So I think it's also a problem of designing in a modular way a system that embraces these different approaches. And so it combines meaningfully the best of them and trying to mitigate the trilemma that Fiskin illustrated so well.
So thank you for this great point. So you raise your hand and back there.
Sure, thank you. I guess I just have a couple thoughts and maybe a provocation and question for the panel too, is I feel like there's this conflation that happens between participatory and democratizing and democracy and oftentimes participatory is really reactionary. And I guess I'm just kind of thinking about where we can go as a community. I share the concern around the US right now, the tech consolidation of power that's happening, thinking about open models, but even open models are still controlled by for-profit creators with for-profit values and priorities in terms of which models are dominating. And so I guess my question is, how can we think bigger as a community and perhaps even move away from participatory to co-creation and ownership? I don't feel like we're talking enough about ownership and more proactive perhaps. And so just curious for any kind of reactions.
And one last question.
I'll keep this very brief. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit. I really enjoyed sort of the discussion of some of the alternative methods of engaging the public. But when you were talking about the public, of course, what is the public? But within that, I think there's a concept called counterpublics, which are elements of the public that define themselves in opposition to different ideologies and different groups. So I just wonder, as we're sort of engaging the public and trying to get their sort of voice into policy, how do we manage that challenge?
Anyone want to answer these? No? Well, I have a couple of comments, as you probably expected. First, this is my opinion, not that of the people who fund me in the US government, NSF. But I love the idea of ownership, but let me tell you, the amounts of money that we're talking about are huge. And we made, like I said before, we made a cardinal sin, which was that we accepted free services in return for something that individually was not that important, but collectively is hugely valuable and allows big companies to manipulate us. So ownership would be a wonderful strategy, but to me, the strategy has to be governance. And here I'm speaking to you, OEU and Brazilian citizens, where governments are effective and able to come up with regulations that, yes, may affect innovation, although that is questionable. There are ways to design this in a systemic way, and that is addressing the third thing. So we're talking complex systems here. We're not talking food. We're talking different types of data, different types of mathematical formulas, infrastructure that is hugely expensive. And I don't think DeepSeek has really challenged those cost things completely. But if you can't come up with a systemic approach to governance that is as flexible and changing as the AI systems are, you are going to fail at governance. Do I have an answer to that? The how? No. I'm old, you guys are young, and I'm counting on you to come up with systems. But I will say this, I don't think resistance, I don't see it effective because I am old. What I do think could help is real boycotts of the platforms. Just as the Canadians organized to boycott the United States, it didn't happen yet, but I hope it will happen. We should all not be on Twitter, not be on Facebook, etc. Maybe that is the way that you get in touch with your friends, and maybe that is the way that you organize, but try Signal. Any other comments?
Those are great questions. I might not have good answers, but I'll say, for example, the democracy issue, working with local governments in Brazil, especially in these like smart cities, agenda from critical perspective. we saw how like industry-led policymaking, lawmaking is kind of undermining democracy at the local level because it's super top-down. There's no opportunity. Sometimes we get an email, but not even that. So I'd say moving away as a community towards ownership. First step, fight privatization of digital public infrastructures and all sorts of services, and AI is collaborating a lot to that in the country as well. So I would start with that, and also separating sometimes civil society organization, grassroots movements, because they are not necessarily the same. Often they are not. And like, what can we learn with other movements as well? From the technology perspective, but people who have been fighting for rights for a long, long time.
Any other comments? Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. Pierre, did you want to say anything, or Tim? No.
Just one thing, just put your hands together for this wonderful panel.